Well, welcome, Jay. Glad to have you here. And I wanted to hear some more about this project. We had said that we wanted to explore a little bit more about your trip to Lebanon, but more specifically, kind of the bigger project of what was happening with Endure International and the production of working in different places. I know that maybe
Yeah.
it's going to get even bigger, but I
Yeah.
hope. But I wanted
Yep.
to hear some more from you about the album that's coming out and what's the story behind it, and
Yeah. Yeah.
we can ask you a few questions.
Great. Yeah. So really, Endure Studios is the name of my studio that I have as a songwriter producer here in Los Angeles, and that's what I do. All of the music that I do under that name, Endure Studio. So that's just working with the local artists I work with here in Los Angeles, as well as the umbrella for any international projects. So what I wanted to do with these international projects, I call them global albums, is I want to go to different regions of the world that have been destabilized through conflict, or through persecution or unrest or crises,
Hmm.
and actually record albums with people that have been affected by that war, by that conflict, and by that crisis. And the real goal there is when we hear about things that happen around the world, we usually hear about it in the context of a news story, which definitely can capture some of the statistics, can capture, some idea of what's happening around the world, but we never really hear just the voices of those people usually.
Actual people, right? It's
Yes,
not real
exactly.
people. Yeah.
We hear statistics, we hear stories, but we don't hear necessarily the human experience side. And
Mhm.
that's where I think media comes in and is such a powerful tool. Really, you think about music and film, the power that those things have to actually show the reality of something that's happening on the ground, and in a different way. Because what it's like to know the statistics of how many Syrian refugees, for instance, have had to flee Syria over the last decade, with that war, you hear numbers, but you don't know what it's like for one particular teenage girl who
Mm.
the building next door to her was bombed and she fled, and someone in her family was lost in the course of the bombing, and then she finds a way to get to Lebanon, and then they start to try to establish a life, and then they start to figure out how to get a job in a foreign
Mm.
country that has so many refugees. So my goal is not to capture sort of a macro. My job is not to be a journalist. It's not to
Mm.
capture sort of the macro story of everything that's happened in the region, but I want to work with individuals that have come through conflict, come through war, come through crises, and work on writing songs with them that can actually show just the human side of who they are and what they've experienced, and then use music as a platform for them to be able to use their voice and have a platform to actually voice their story and voice their creativity and their art, and also have that be a way that the rest of the world can understand a little bit more about that particular issue
Mm.
in a way that's not news or statistics oriented.
Mm. That's great.
So that's really the goal. That's the vision. And so, I had done a little bit of work in Lebanon before, not on the music side of things, and so I had gotten to know some Syrian refugees, and I'd gotten really to know the issue of the Syrian refugee crisis. And so I had the idea to go back and have really my first kind of pilot project of these global albums be with Syrian refugees in Lebanon. And so I got this idea really. I zoned in on choosing Lebanon as the spot for the first project at the very end of 2018. And then I went at the beginning of 2019. I took two trips. I took one in January, February of 2019, and then another one late July through early August. And I just went, and I had a couple contacts in Beirut, Lebanon,
Mm.
and they connected me with some people in the refugee community they knew that sing. And that's about all I had to
Wow.
go on to start with. But then it snowballed from there, and I found a really, really neat community of Syrian refugees that have kind of formed this Kurdish community within Beirut. And I started recording songs, or started writing songs with them there, and started recording them on the spot with a little mobile recording studio I brought.
Mm.
And then fast forward a year a year and a half, and we just released a record with it.
It's great. So the third installation of that just came out, and
Yeah, so originally I went to record one album,
Uh-huh.
and and I had the songs for essentially a short album, but I decided to take that second trip because I felt like there was an element of the human experience that I had heard them talk about, but we didn't have any songs about it yet, and so yeah, I felt like there was something missing on the album, so I went back to write and record a few more songs in July, August. And when all was said and done, I came back and I had so much content. And normally I'd cut this, I'd cut songs. I'd say, okay, these are the ones I feel like are the best. But I felt like each song was really important for one of the particular artists I was working with, for their voice and their story. And so I decided instead to take this album, which is, at the end of the day, it's 24 tracks, which is insane. And I released it in 3 pieces. I essentially broke it into 3 chapters, which we released in little EPs: Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3, and then we just put out the full album, which is the full 24 track record with all of the songs from Chapter 1, 2, and 3, plus 4 bonus tracks.
When I was watching the interview by the UNHCR, the High Commission for Refugees, they I think, I can't remember if it was you or one of the refugees that said that it's the thing that you've been repeating, that it gives a voice to people, and they felt like somebody was actually listening, and that they were able to express themselves, even what they were experiencing and what they felt. That comes through a lot in the album. It's really great about the tracks about home and about wanting. There was one phrase in there that said something like, "I to not have to wait for you anymore," something like that. I can't remember the exact wording, but it was. I thought that longing and kind of expecting a day when their longing will end was moving.
Yes. Yeah, there's one song that I wrote and recorded with a Kurdish Syrian refugee named Sozda, and it's called "One Day," and it really is about that. It's about one day there is going to be a sense of peace. One day she'll be able to go to sleep without just having all of these flashbacks constantly. But until then, this is what her experience is like every day. And it's a sad song. It's a very mournful song, but there's an element of hope in it, which I thought was pretty interesting and really neat.
Well, I mean, I guess in the U.S. these days we try to shield ourselves in a lot of ways from things that we have to lament or that make us sad. We kind of want to pep each other up, but there's an element of grieving, I think, that's really healthy in that. And boy, they've been through more than we can imagine right now.
Yeah, and I think it's so different. Think about this in the context of just friendships. There's such a big difference between knowing about somebody and knowing them. Yeah. You know, if you have a friend whose spouse passes away, or whose immediate family member passes away, you hear about that and you understand the story in about 5 seconds, right? But when you know that person, it changes the experience entirely. Yeah. And when you walk through that with somebody, it changes both of your experiences entirely. Yeah, I think that's really been my goal, is to, again, if I wanted to just talk to people that I know in the United States and talk to them about the Syrian refugee crisis, I could point them to about 10 different Google links and give them a historical backdrop of everything. But I don't want, there's plenty of information. You could sit on a computer and find information for days about something. I want to have a refugee who's gone through something get to speak their story, and I want people to actually know them in some small way. And that's been really the goal of this record.
That's great. Well, you kind of spoke to the changing part. How has this project shaped you or changed you? How do you feel like, I mean, I'm sure you had certain expectations going into it, but I don't know. How do you feel like you've been shaped by the whole thing? What's God doing?
I mean, yeah, no, it's really been pretty amazing for me. I mean, it's been a massive challenge and such a privilege to struggle through that challenge. Again, when you're working with people who culturally have a completely different type of music and way of expressing themselves in different languages. I mean, on this record, we've got There's English, there's Arabic, there's Kurdish, Syrian Kurdish, and there's Iraqi Kurdish. And the Kurdish between my Iraqi artist, John Matthew, and the Syrian Kurdish artist, the language is so different that they can barely communicate with each other.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So it's really almost 4 languages, even though, 2 of those languages are both Kurdish, just different dialects. And so, yeah, I mean, when you're working on a project like that with multiple languages, multiple styles of music and everything, it can be crazy. But I think one of my favorite things about this project and about even this concept is there's no way that if I was sitting in Los Angeles, I would ever make this record. I never would. I would never be inspired by those particular sounds. I would never be trying to work with sounds that were so different than what I'm used to. And they would never be making music like this either, because they would never be working with, a crazy US producer, who's got different sorts of ideas, beats and everything like that. And just ways of writing songs and ways of expressing ourselves. So I mean, my understanding of, I think the most enriching thing for me has just been really getting to know the people. Because man, you talk about people that have an incredible amount of inner strength, and it's usually people that have been through tremendous amounts of hardship. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why I named my studio Endure, Endure Studios, why I named this project Endure, is because to me there are certain levels of strength that you can only attain through suffering through immense difficulties. Just getting to know and become friends really with some of these Syrian refugees and Iraqi refugee has really been an honor. I've grown so much through learning from them about what's kept them going through things that we can't imagine going through here.
I think something that I just thought of when you were talking about that is that it does seem that there's a certain level of trust they've had to have in you to even kind of entrust you with this project, because it feels really intimate in a way. If they're singing, if they're writing songs next to you, and besides just spending a bunch of time with you, but that whole process feels they're having to open a door to themselves that you're getting let in to. That's pretty. So how, we heard on the news about what happened in Beirut. So for these folks who are in Beirut, they've already gone through the crumbling of these terrible things that are happening in their countries and caused by geopolitical things out of their control. And then they go to another country and they settle down, and then they have a huge explosion. I don't know, how are they doing? How are they handling this stuff?
Overall, so a few days after the explosion, I ended up flying to Beirut. I had, a couple friends of mine and contacts that had been affected at various levels by the explosion. And so I wanted to go. And so I did. And I think I was actually really blown away by the resilience of especially the Syrian refugee community. And in fact, really, the Syrian refugee community has been helping the Lebanese communities that got that really took the brunt of the explosion. They've been helping them rebuild, which has been really neat to see. I mean, and incredible tragedy. And I really had no clue. I'd seen all sorts of videos, but I had no clue the extent of the damage until I was actually there on the ground, because even buildings that I thought, oh, okay, they've lost all of the windows, they've had the walls blown out, but the structure is still standing. Well, the structure is actually bent. Like the frame of the structure of these skyscraper buildings are bent. And so they'll probably have to be demolished. And then you just see block after block after block after block, kilometer after kilometer after kilometer, just destroyed. Yes, the area that got hit the hardest, there were a couple neighborhoods. The one I spent a lot of time in was called Jamazi, and it's mostly a Lebanese community. And so when I was there, I went into one of the Syrian refugee communities called Naba, which is one of the poor areas of Beirut. And they were loading up cars of people taking sandwiches over to Jamazi to pass out food to volunteers that are helping clean up. They've got people, all day, every day, they're helping clear wreckage and rubble out of houses. So, the Syrian refugee community is, there's simultaneously this sense of incredible resilience and helpfulness, but then there's also this kind of deep sense of we had left war, we've come to this place. It's been tough for us to build a life here, but we have started to build a life here. Is there something else I can help with? I've got Siri over here starting a side conversation.
She wants in too.
Yeah. Yeah, so there definitely is that sense of when are we ever going to find peace?
Yeah.
And that's a tough one. And Beirut is in such a difficult place right now because they're wrestling with all sorts of, they've been wrestling with devaluing currency for the last year, which is devalued almost about 4 times what it was really just a year ago. They've got all sorts of political unrest and corruption that they're dealing with. And so it's a very, very rough situation right now in Beirut.
Great. Well, what do you feel like, maybe you've touched on this, but what do you feel like you would want kind of the average American Christian to know about maybe refugees in general, or more specifically like Kurdish, Syrian, and Iraqi refugees in Lebanon? I don't know, like, but what should we, what would you want us to know or want us to connect with, I guess?
Yeah, sure. I think probably the biggest one is just recognizing that you've got people from another side of the world that have been involved in a conflict that, a lot of times the way we think about a people group that's across the world that's been engaged in a conflict or a war, a lot of times we'll think about the people based on the political lens that people view that conflict through. So depending on your political stance, you may look at the people very differently. And I think at the end of the day, just recognize that people are people. And in the refugee community, there's this whole spectrum of people the same way there is in Los Angeles or Dallas, Texas. I mean, you've got people that are incredibly gifted, incredibly talented, and then you've got people that do not have the best intentions or can use situations. And so, I think that the main takeaway from me has really been looking at the refugee community as really this massively, in some ways, untapped talent pool. There's so many brilliant, smart, hardworking people that are full of resilience and would love to work hard and build a future for themselves and their family, and are just looking for a place that they can do that. And so I think that's probably been the biggest thing I've taken away from my time with the people of Syria is that. And there are people that a lot of times will look at a community like the refugee community and think, oh, well, we can only try to help them. But I think when we recognize that there's actually significant things we can learn from people that have been through what they've been through, it changes the conversation. And it becomes more of a, how can we come alongside people as friends, as opposed to how can we reach out and just try to give handouts to a community that's in need. And there are certainly immense needs among that refugee community. But I walk away thinking that I learned so much about resilience, about strength, about faith, about hope. I learned so much in terms of my understanding my relationship with God and my walk with God. I learned so much from these people that I went to go and try to do something to help them. And yet being around them and seeing the strength of some of their faith and their faith in God, their community with each other. And I walked away thinking, man, I've got so much to learn from these people. So it's very much just like any friendship. There's a give and give that comes. You learn some things from your friends and you teach some things to your friends. And I think if we were to start to take that kind of attitude towards the refugee community, it could be a really, really powerful thing for both those in the West or those in the United States, as well as the refugees.
Well, even on a practical level, you're saying even after the explosion, they were already helping out with the Lebanese who were there. There's a concrete way that they were even doing that. But then there's even this other richness that they're bringing to the place. And
Or I think about, so one of the girls that I really went to see was one of the main artists that I worked with on this record is a Syrian girl from Afrin named Mizgin Khalil. And her family, her brother plays the timbre, and he was a big instrumental part of this record. She's a great singer and songwriter. And she's got her sister, her older sister is just 22 years old, named Sozgin. And Sozgin was going back to work in the evening, and the explosion happened a little after 6 p.m. And she had gone back into her office where she works, and she was only about 150 meters away from the explosion. Literally, you have the port, and then you have a highway, and then you have the first kind of row of buildings in Genesi, this neighborhood. And she was at the ports here, and the port exploded. Port explosion happened here. She was at a building just directly across the street from it, and really on the very front lines of the blast. And it's really almost miraculous that she's alive.
I was gonna say,
but she was hurt pretty severely. It was in the hospital. There were people in her building and adjacent buildings that were killed in the explosion. And so you think, oh man, this is a 22-year-old girl that just needs a lot of help and needs our help. And it was so great. Through the studio, we were able to raise some money for her for GoFundMe, through a GoFundMe campaign for her family right now. But then I'm going and I'm sitting in Beirut with Sozgin once she'd gotten released from the hospital. I was sitting in this room with her and her family, and she's showing me pictures of some of the work that she's been doing in the last year. And she makes dresses. She is an incredibly gifted artisan in terms of like the hand stitching and stuff that she'll do on dresses. And she works for this company that does designer dresses where it's I don't know anything about the fashion world, but it's not like they make a dress and then there are hundreds of those being sold at stores. They make every single dress as its own thing. And she's stitched dresses for Beyonce and the Queen of Jordan and some British royalty. I mean, and this girl is insanely talented. She's 22 years old. And what would be so easy for us to be like, oh, well, she's a refugee girl that maybe she, could use some help with money. Well, she's doing stuff, and she's doing work at the caliber of any designer on Hollywood Boulevard or in New York City. And so it just another reminder to me of, man, I was going to help their family, and I just have this another glimpse into the insane amount of talent that they have. So.
It's funny, there's something. It wasn't that long ago that in our church we studied the book of Philemon, and it reminds me of that, where there's kind of an automatic disparity where Philemon had this guy Onesimus who had been working for him, and he had been his slave, and then he ran away, and then he comes back, and Paul tells him you need to treat him as your equal. And there's a commitment as a Christian that Paul is calling him to. He says, as a Christian, you have to consider him your brother. But then there's also kind of at some point a human recognition that he actually is your equal. That this guy and that guy Onesimus, he ended up being a leader in the church that recorded in history. And like, I think somehow that connects in my mind when you're saying that. I think we can feel the disparity of like, well, I'm in a position of power, whoever we are, and but there's both a choice to choose to see somebody as my equal. Like I have to actually choose into that. But if I see the person as they are, I actually will feel, wow, this person really is, this person's amazing. That we can allow somebody, it's almost like there's I have to choose myself to allow myself to see what's real and not, and get out of that old paradigm that I had maybe before.
Yeah, absolutely. Or I think sometimes when we think, it's easy for us to compare ourselves to another person or another group of people and try to make a blanket statement of, okay, we are better in this regard, or we are worse in this regard, or they're out of our league or we're out of their league, that kind of mentality. But I think, I think the scriptures talk significantly about the idea of when you live in a body of people, everybody has different talents and different gifts, and you want in that body, you want the people that are gifted at one thing to do that, and you learn from those people in that. And then they might not share the same gifts as another group of people who are great at something else. And so I think that's what I've really learned from a lot of the refugee communities. Yes, certainly they've got needs where a lot of the rest of the world has surplus, right? But then there are other areas that we have significant deficiencies where they have surplus, and being able to recognize that and learn from it. You know, it's neat. One of the big visions of this record too was not just working with artists for this record, artists in Lebanon or Syrians, but then I would write songs with the refugee community there, and I'd come back to Los Angeles and I work with some different artists in Los Angeles on this project. So, you know, most of the songs on the project are multilingual. There's some songs that are only in English or only in Arabic or only in Kurdish, but most of them have this intermixing of languages and voices where you've got an artist from Syria and an artist from Los Angeles. And one of the coolest moments, I work in Los Angeles with an artist named Faith Richards, who's really amazing. And we got on a WhatsApp call. I was working on a song with Ms. Geen, this girl that I was telling you about her family.
Yeah.
And, you know, we jumped on a WhatsApp video call with Ms. Geen, and we were talking through this song that Ms. Geen and I had written, and Ivan, another Syrian refugee, we'd written half of the song in Beirut and recorded half the song in Beirut, but we were writing this chorus in the US. And so getting Ms. Geen on a WhatsApp call with Faith Richards, and us just getting to introduce them and them getting to talk about life and then sing a song together. And they're both about the same age with completely different backgrounds, but coming together on the song and the interplay of the story, just really kind of beautiful moment, bringing those people together.
I don't know if how much of a fact this was. Maybe so maybe you could talk about this a little bit. I'm guessing I haven't met a lot of Kurdish Christians, so I'm guessing that the majority of people that you worked with were Muslims. So was that, or maybe talk about how faith entered into this whole discussion and interaction of things? And
actually, most of the people I ended up working with had become Christians. So largely because one of the main communities that I made this record with was the first two guys I met that then introduced me to the rest of the community. They were worship leaders in this in this community in Naba, Beirut, in a larger neighborhood called Burs Hamoud, and so yes, many of the refugees I worked. In fact, most of them had become Christians at some stage from when they moved from Syria to Lebanon. Okay. And again, that's one of the ways that I learned so much from them is experiencing their understanding of faith in God, going through the lens of walking through a war and losing family members and friends and coming to a place where they really don't have many prospects at all, and trying to set up a life there and living in a 2-bedroom apartment with 1 bathroom and 8 people, you know, and seeing the way that they find hope and trust and faith and joy in the Lord versus the way that we can do it, but we have so many comforts around us that can make so many things in life easy. Whereas they have to wrestle through the hard questions of why could God allow this? Why did this happen? Why did this happen? That might shake our faith when something happens that really shakes us, or something happens that we don't understand and we have a bunch of questions, unanswered questions. Well, they've been through those unanswered questions time and time again. And so, yeah, learning from their faith is pretty powerful. So, yeah, in the Muslim community, I do have many contacts and friends in the Muslim community, and you know, I think we can even learn things from them. We might differ on theology, but you can learn a lot from people, even people that believe drastically different.
I've learned a tremendous amount about hospitality from my Muslim friends, and
yeah, absolutely.
I always thought I was hospitable because I would offer somebody a glass of water in my house, and I found out that is not even on the range of what is hospitable. It's not even in the spectrum of hospitality.
Well, you know, I would go into refugee camps in the Bekaa Valley which the refugee camps in the Bekaa Valley look a lot more like the slums that a lot of times people will see in the news, where it's just these little tent cities essentially that develop. And I mean, I'd sit down with a Muslim family there, and they immediately sit you down. They'll go in and they'll bring out in it from a tent where they have very, very little, very few resources at all. And they'll bring out sodas to you. They'll bring out chocolates. They'll make Arabic coffee for you, which is very close to my heart. And I mean, yeah, it's when you experience hospitality, when you at the moment might have more money in your wallet than they see in 2 months, right? And yet they roll out the red carpet for you, and they just do everything in their power to make you feel welcome, make you feel valued. It can be humbling.
Yeah.
Very humbling.
Yeah, for sure. And to realize that that's actually a value encouraged in scripture, that we should be hospitable. I think that never stood out to me before as a normal American guy. What kind of encouragement do you have for people? You're using your gifts, you're using your skills. I don't know. Not everybody's going to want to do a recording studio, or should. It would be bad news if you
hear. Is that your next month?
No, you don't want to hear my vocals track on any of these kind of things. My vocal track would be to send everybody running. So, but I don't know, maybe this is off the cuff kind of thing. I just wonder, is there an encouragement you'd have for people using their skills and doing something like this to do something meaningful?
Yes, I do. I think there may be two things that I think. One would be the power of just showing up. I think sometimes we think we have to have everything figured out before we step in and do something. And certainly the more that you can plan, the more that you can figure out how to be efficient and use the talents and resources and gifts that you have the best way. Of course, that's valuable. But I think a lot of times we'll sit on things and never do something just because we don't have all the answers yet. When sometimes just showing up matters. Showing up really matters. And so if something is really important to you, when you show up, you'll find ways that you can use your particular skill sets and your particular gifts to be involved in a particular situation. And sometimes I think you'll recognize, I think we don't all know ourselves as well as we think we do. And it's when we step into a situation where you're having to a lot of times adapt very quickly, you'll start to see some of the strengths that you didn't know you had, and you'll start to see areas of weakness that you didn't know you had. And the only way that you're going to see those and then learn how to operate in the highest level of strength and find ways to bring team members around you that can make up for your weaknesses is to just show up and do it. So that would be my number one, show up. The second would be use who you are instead of what you think you need to be to be a part of something that really matters to you. And, again, for me, I studied international relations in college. And then when I left, I essentially really had two professional skill sets. I was good at fighting. I was good at fighting not even as good. I was okay at music, right? But I really enjoyed it. And so, for me, I'd spent time in areas of the world where I'd been there and I had shown up, but the things that I was doing weren't necessarily lining up with what I brought to the table the same way. And so once I had those experiences, I was able to figure out, okay, well, this is something I'm good at. This is something I can do that's different. And sure, when I show up to Lebanon, there are all sorts of needs. And there's so many needs in that country that are much greater than making an album, right? There are. There's what a lot of the refugee community needs more than an album or jobs or food or rent. Especially jobs. But when you take something that you're good at and you go and do that in an area, it can really do something, and it can do something special. So I think that's probably my biggest takeaway is figure out what you bring to the table, hone that skill. If you've got a talent at something, put the time and the reps in to turn that talent into an actual skill. Because once you really build a skill, then you really have something to offer a community. You have something to offer if you want to be a part of a mission, and then go do that.
I hope that there are people who would be encouraged to think about that, to not have to do it, whatever, to do your thing, to do somebody else's thing, but to say, all right, well, is there a specific way that I have the skills that I've built or something that I'm passionate about? And if I can just show up and to be able to do that well, and to do it in their local community, or to maybe even go all the way around the world to do that kind of thing. I think that would be terrific. That would be a great way for other people to serve, even if it is a small thing. Maybe it's not the most important thing, but it is an important thing. And I heard that in those interviews, that people were saying this is important too.
Yeah. And I guess maybe if I had, I'll give it a third. If I had one third thing, it would say, I think, we live in a time where it's very easy for us to identify problems that exist in the world. I mean, we have such access right now to see where there are any issues. We got 24/7 news on a phone. You've got social media. I mean, it is so easy for people to identify problems. And I think it can be very easy to come up with maybe oversimplified solutions and think that we have the idea that everybody needs. And if everybody would only listen to us, then the world would be a better place, right? Yeah. And I think when you go and you be a part of anything whether it be an area of conflict or an area of crisis, an area of injustice, if you can before you give your prescription for how to solve everything, if you can really listen, because I guarantee you, when you step into a severe conflict, or when you step into an area of tremendous need in the world, the situation is probably going to be a little different than you think it is once you actually show up. And so, listen first, and then start to offer what you have to bring.
Well, thanks for taking some time. I don't need to keep you forever, but I think it's great for people in our church to get to know you a little bit better and see you in a different way too, and to hear what's going on for you. And so I think it's a terrific project. So the album is called For Home.
For Home.
And
it's by Endure. So yeah, if you wanted to search it, you type all capitals Endure right here, and then For Home.
Yeah. I found it on Spotify.
Yeah. So. And in September, there's actually one of a good friend of mine is a filmmaker in Atlanta, and I told him about this project, and he called me a couple days later and told me, I'm coming on this trip with you, and I'm making a documentary about it. So he did, and he made a full length, I think it's an 1 hour and 26-minute documentary that he's that's going to hit distribution on Amazon Prime in September.
Okay.
So
are you going to get us a discount?
Yeah. Amazon Prime, the discount is completely free if you have Amazon Prime. But yeah, if anyone wanted to see, because it's also really easy when you finish something to talk about it. And talk about it where it sounds like, oh, you had everything figured out the whole time and you just went and executed your plan, blah, blah. But if you want to see the dysfunction of figuring this out and working through the difficulties in the process,
the hiccups,
you can see plenty of dysfunction in September.
That's fun. So you said, when is that? September?
September.
Okay. Hey, that'd be great. I think it'd be fun to get to watch that. I don't know if we can get together for a screening, but everybody can screen it. Everybody who's got Amazon Prime can do it at home. Mm-hmm. Everybody who doesn't, then you'll put them on your account or something.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you, Kurt.
Yeah. Thanks, man. It's great to hear from you.